It was the late 1990s in Chicago, a time when success was often measured by the shine of your shoes and the height of your office building. The city buzzed with ambition, and no one embodied that more than a man named William Grant. He was the kind of man people noticed the moment he walked into a room. Tall, confident, always dressed in perfectly pressed suits. To the world, William had everything: wealth, respect, and a family name that carried weight. But beneath all that charm was a man who often made decisions with his ego instead of his heart. William owned one of the fastest-growing real estate firms in the city. His office sat high above downtown, the kind of place where people worked late just to be seen working. He liked it that way. He liked being the man everyone wanted to impress. He liked the power that came with knowing that his words could make or break someone's career. In that same office building worked a young woman named Angela Brooks. She was bright, efficient, and had a way of keeping calm even when everyone else was losing their patience. She didn't come from money. She had worked her way through school, taking night classes while holding down 2 part-time jobs. When she was finally hired as William's assistant, she felt like her life was beginning to change for the better. Angela admired William, not for his wealth, but for his focus and the way he seemed to command a room without saying much. She respected his drive and thought there was something to learn from him. But as weeks turned into months, admiration slowly turned into something she couldn't quite explain. William noticed her too. She wasn't just another employee to him. There was a quiet strength in her, a kindness he rarely saw in the cold corporate world. They began to share longer conversations, first about work, then about life. Sometimes William would stop by her desk after hours, asking her opinion on things that had nothing to do with real estate. Angela would smile, slightly unsure why the man everyone feared talking to suddenly wanted her advice. He'd compliment her calmness, her intelligence, and she, against her better judgment, began to look forward to those moments. It started innocently, like most complicated stories do. One late evening after everyone else had gone home, William walked into her office carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You've been working too hard," he said, setting one on her desk. She laughed and said, "Says the man who never leaves the building." They talked for hours, about their childhoods, about dreams, about what they both wished life could have been if things were different. When he finally stood up to leave, there was a pause, one of those long silences where 1,000 thoughts are shared without words. From that night on, something changed. They started meeting after work, dinners, late-night drives, small moments that felt like a secret world away from the stress of business meetings and deadlines. Angela knew she was walking a dangerous path, but she told herself it was harmless, that it was just a connection between 2 people who understood each other. William, on the other hand, was torn between guilt and desire. He had a wife, a reputation, and a company that depended on his perfect image. But when he was with Angela, the noise of his world faded. She made him feel seen, not as a CEO, not as a powerful man, but as a person who still had a heart beating underneath all the pressure. Weeks turned into months, and their relationship grew deeper. They kept it hidden, careful not to be noticed. Angela told no one. She wasn't the kind of woman who bragged or sought attention. To her, it wasn't about money or status. It was about connection, about finally feeling cared for. But secrets have a way of changing everything. One morning, Angela stood in front of her bathroom mirror, holding a small test with shaking hands. The 2 faint lines stared back at her. Her breath caught in her throat. She sat down on the edge of the bathtub, her heart pounding so loudly it felt like the whole world could hear it. She was going to have a baby. For a long time, she just sat there staring at the wall. 1,000 thoughts ran through her mind. Fear, confusion, hope. She knew what this meant. She knew it would change everything. But deep down, she believed that William would stand by her. He wasn't a cruel man, she told herself. He cared for her. He had to. That evening, she gathered all her courage and told him. They were sitting in his office after everyone had gone home. He was reviewing some papers, and she said quietly, "There's something important I need to tell you." He looked up, a little distracted at first, but when he saw her serious face, he set the papers down. "I'm pregnant," she said. For a moment, there was silence, the kind that stretches longer than it should. William blinked slowly as if trying to process the words. "What did you say?" "I'm pregnant," she repeated, her voice softer now. It's yours. His expression changed. Confusion, then disbelief, and finally fear. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the glowing city below. Angela, he said quietly, you know what this means. She nodded. Yes, I do. I'm not asking for anything. I just thought you should know. He turned around, his voice sharp now. You can't keep it, her heart sank. What? It'll destroy everything, he said, pacing the room. My marriage, my company, my reputation, and everything I've built. You don't understand what's at stake. Angela's eyes filled with tears, but she held them back. I'm not asking you to give up anything, she said softly. I can't do what you're asking me to do. William rubbed his forehead, frustration all over his face. Angela, please think about this logically. She shook her head. I have. This is my decision. For the first time, he looked small. Not powerful, not confident. Just a man caught between fear and consequence. If you go through with this, I can't protect you, he said. There will be rumors. People talk. Angela took a deep breath. Then let them. The following weeks were cold and distant. William stopped visiting her office. He avoided eye contact, spoke to her only through short emails or formal meetings. The warmth that once filled their conversations was gone. Angela continued working quietly, though she felt the tension building around her. And then one morning she was called into his office. He didn't even look at her when she walked in. There was a letter already on his desk, her termination notice. What is this? She asked, her voice trembling. Budget cuts, he said flatly, still staring at his papers. She knew it was a lie. Everyone did. But she also knew there was nothing she could do. She stood there for a long moment, trying to find the right words, but none came. Finally, she said softly, I trusted you. William finally looked up. For a second, guilt flashed across his eyes, but he quickly looked away. I'm sorry, he said. It's for the best. She turned and walked out without another word. Her footsteps echoed down the hallway, each one heavier than the last. Outside the office, the cold wind hit her face. She pulled her coat tighter, feeling the weight of everything crash down on her. The city lights blurred through her tears as she walked aimlessly down the street, unsure of what would come next. That night, she sat alone in her small apartment, holding her belly. We're going to be okay, she whispered, though she wasn't sure she believed it. She thought about the man who had promised to care for her, the man who had looked at her once like she was the only person in the world. Now she was just a secret he wanted to erase. Days turned into weeks, and Angela tried to move forward. She applied for jobs, though her growing stomach made interviews harder. Some employers looked at her with pity. Others avoided eye contact altogether. Still, she refused to give up. She found work as a receptionist at a small law firm, far from the tall buildings and fancy offices she once knew. Sometimes, on her way home, she would pass by William's company building. She'd see his name on the glass doors, the logo she had once proudly represented. For a moment, she'd wonder if he ever thought about her, about them. But she never lingered on the thought for long. She had a new life to focus on now. Months passed. Her belly grew, and so did her resolve. She saved every dollar she could, preparing for the baby's arrival. The nights were hard, but she found comfort in small things. The sound of the city outside her window, the warmth of the sunlight in the morning, the gentle kick that reminded her she wasn't alone. William, meanwhile, buried himself in work. On the surface, nothing had changed. He still attended meetings, still smiled for the cameras, still played the role of the successful businessman. But late at night, when the office was quiet, he sometimes found himself staring out at the city lights, thinking about the choices he had made. He'd tell himself it was necessary, that he did what he had to do to protect his family and his company. But deep down, a small part of him knew the truth. He had been a coward. Angela gave birth to a healthy baby boy on a rainy afternoon in early spring. She named him quietly, without fanfare. When she held him for the first time, all her fear melted away. His tiny fingers wrapped around hers, and she felt something powerful, a reason to keep going no matter how hard life became. She didn't tell anyone who the father was. When the nurses asked, she simply smiled and said, "That doesn't matter. What matters is that he's loved." As the years passed, Angela worked hard to provide for her child. The road wasn't easy. There were nights she went without sleep, days she skipped meals, and moments when she wondered if she'd made a mistake by believing in someone like William. But every time she looked at her son, she knew she'd made the right choice. Back in his high-rise office, William never spoke of Angela again. The people around him had no idea what had happened. He went on with his life, his career, his image intact. But sometimes, in the quiet moments between success and silence, he'd think of her, the woman who had once looked at him with trust and hope. The woman he had failed. He didn't know it yet, but life had a way of circling back. For now, though, the story of a rich man and the woman he betrayed ended quietly, not with shouting or scandal, but with a single mother standing alone in the cold, holding on to faith that someday, somehow, things would turn around. And as she whispered to her newborn that night, "You'll do great things," the world outside carried on, unaware that this small beginning would one day return to the very man who had tried so hard to erase it. The small apartment smelled faintly of baby powder and coffee. Morning light spilled through the thin curtains, painting soft stripes on the worn carpet. Angela sat on the edge of the bed, gently rocking her baby in her arms. His tiny breaths brushed against her skin, warm and steady, a reminder that she had something worth living for. Life wasn't easy, not even close. But every cry, every sleepless night, every small smile made her feel that all the pain she'd gone through had a purpose. She had lost her job, her trust, and a part of her heart, but she had gained something far greater. Money was tight. The job at the law firm paid little, and childcare was expensive. There were days when she'd leave work exhausted, carrying groceries in one hand and her son in the other. But even on those nights when her feet ached and her body begged for rest, she'd look at him and whisper, "We're going to be okay." She meant it. The months passed quickly. Her son grew stronger, his laughter echoing through the small apartment like music. He loved to look out the window at the city lights, his tiny hands pressed against the glass. Angela often stood behind him, smiling quietly, though sometimes a shadow crossed her face. There were moments when she thought about William, where he might be, what he might be doing. She imagined him sitting in his tall glass office, signing papers, giving orders, living the same perfect life he always had. He probably never thought of her anymore, and she told herself that was fine. She didn't need his money or his name. She only needed to make sure her child never felt unwanted. When her son turned 3, she started taking night classes again. She wanted a better job, something that could give them stability. During the day, she worked long hours. At night, she studied after putting him to bed. Some nights, she would fall asleep with her head resting on her notebook. But she never stopped trying. Neighbors in her building often offered to help. Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly woman who lived downstairs, sometimes watched the boy while Angela ran errands. "You remind me of my daughter," the old woman would say, smiling kindly. Strong but stubborn, Angela would laugh softly. "Stubborn is all I have left," she'd reply. The years rolled on, one small victory at a time. By the time her son started school, Angela had managed to earn a promotion at work. It wasn't much, but it was enough for them to move to a slightly better neighborhood. The new apartment was still small, but it had sunlight, a park nearby, and a little balcony where she could sit in the evenings after dinner. Her boy was bright, curious, and kind. He loved books and always asked questions that made her smile. "Mom," he once asked, "why don't I have a dad like the other kids?" Angela paused. She had rehearsed this moment in her head 1,000 times, but it still hurt when the words finally came. "Some dads aren't ready to be dads," she said softly. "But that's okay. You have me, and that's enough." He nodded thoughtfully, then smiled. "Yeah, you're better than a dad anyway." She laughed through her tears. "I'll take that." As the years passed, the boy grew more independent. He loved school, always eager to learn. Angela couldn't afford private tutoring, but she helped him with homework every night, even when she was tired. On weekends, they visited the library together, where he'd lose himself in books about cities, buildings, and inventions. One afternoon, as they walked home with a stack of library books, he said, "Mom, when I grow up, I want to build big buildings like the ones downtown." Angela smiled but felt a pinch in her chest. She thought of William and his tall glass towers that reached into the clouds. "That's a wonderful dream," she said, hiding her sadness. "And you'll do it. You just have to work hard and never forget where you came from." He grinned. "Like you?" "Exactly like me," she said. Meanwhile, across town, William's life had gone on unchanged on the surface. But quietly, things had started to crumble. His marriage had grown cold, his wife distant. They smiled in public, attended charity galas, and posed for photos, but behind closed doors, silence filled their mansion like smoke. He told himself it was just the cost of success. That was what powerful men did. They sacrificed emotion for ambition. Yet sometimes late at night, when he was alone in his office, he'd think about the woman he once let go and the child he'd never met. He tried not to, but memories had a way of returning when the world went quiet. Years turned into decades. The city changed, buildings rose, people came and went. Angela's hair grew streaked with gray, though her eyes still carried the same determination they always had. Her son was now a young man, full of energy and ideas. He worked part-time jobs while studying business and architecture. Every day, he'd come home with sketches in his notebook, plans for buildings, homes, and designs that looked like they belonged in the future. Angela often watched him draw late at night, her heart full of pride. He was everything she had dreamed he would be, focused, respectful, and kind. Sometimes she'd think about telling him the truth about his father, but every time the thought came, she pushed it away. She didn't want to burden him with the pain of the past. One evening, as she folded laundry, he came into the room and said, "Mom, do you ever think about the people who left your life?" She paused. "Sometimes." "Why?" He shrugged. "I just wonder how they live with themselves." Angela smiled sadly. Everyone lives with their choices. Some just carry heavier ones than others. He didn't ask further, but something in her tone stayed with him. By his early 20s, he had finished college with honors. He had worked harder than anyone around him, fueled by quiet determination and an unspoken desire to prove himself. He never knew where that fire came from. It just lived inside him, pushing him to be better every day. Angela watched proudly as he landed his first job at a small real estate consulting firm. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. She still remembered holding him as a baby, whispering that he'd do great things someday. Now, watching him walk into his new office, she realized those words were coming true. At work, he was known for his discipline and creative ideas. He wasn't loud or flashy, but when he spoke, people listened. Within a few years, he climbed the ladder faster than anyone expected. He studied trends, learned from mentors, and built a reputation for honesty and innovation. Angela's health began to fade around that time. Years of exhaustion and stress had taken a toll. She rarely complained, but her son noticed. She tired easily, coughed often, and sometimes sat quietly on the balcony, lost in thought. "Mom, you should rest more," he'd say, worry in his voice. She'd smile. "I've been resting all my life in the ways that matter. Don't worry about me. Just focus on your dreams." He didn't argue, but deep down he knew something wasn't right. One evening he came home early and found her sitting with an old envelope in her hands. Her eyes were wet. When he asked what it was, she shook her head. "Just something I should have thrown away a long time ago." After she went to bed, he saw the envelope on the table. It was yellowed with age, addressed in neat handwriting, the logo of a company embossed in the corner. The same company where his mother had once worked, though she had never told him much about it. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. Something in his gut told him that whatever was inside belonged to a part of her life she had chosen to bury. The next morning she acted as if nothing had happened. But her smile was a little weaker, her movement slower. Months passed. Her health worsened. Hospital visits became frequent. She tried to hide the pain, but her son saw it all, the tremor in her hands, the fatigue in her eyes. One night as she lay in bed, she called him over. "There's something I need to tell you," she said quietly. He sat beside her, holding her hand. "You're going to do great things," she said, her voice trembling. "But before you do, I want you to promise me something." "Anything," he whispered. "Promise me you'll never let bitterness lead you. Life will give you reasons to hate, but you must choose to rise above it. Always take the higher road." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "I promise," she smiled weakly. "Good, then I can rest." The following weeks were hard. Her condition grew worse and she was soon too weak to talk. He spent every night by her side, holding her hand, replaying every memory they'd shared. The day she passed away, the sun shone bright outside, as if the world refused to mourn. He buried her quietly, surrounded by a few close friends and neighbors. After the ceremony, he stood alone at her grave, his heart heavy but filled with gratitude. She had given him everything: love, courage, and the strength to stand tall in a world that often tried to knock people down. In the weeks that followed, he went through her things. Inside a box at the back of her closet, he found a photo of her younger days, standing in front of a tall building wearing a proud smile. On the back of the photo, in faded ink, were the words "First day at the firm." Below it, tucked inside an old folder, was a single letter. It was from William Grant, dated over 2 decades earlier. The words were short and formal, a letter of termination. But what caught his attention wasn't the letter itself, but the signature at the bottom. He stared at it for a long time. His chest tightened. He didn't need anyone to explain. Somehow everything made sense. The silence, the unanswered questions, the pain his mother carried but never shared. He folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the box. He didn't feel anger, at least not the kind that burned. It was something deeper, a quiet determination to make sure his mother's story didn't end with betrayal. From that day forward, he worked harder than ever. He built connections, gained trust, and soon opened his own company, a small but ambitious firm focused on real estate development with honesty and heart. Every project he completed felt like a tribute to the woman who had raised him with nothing but strength and love. He never told anyone about the letter, never spoke of the man whose name was written at the bottom of it. But he knew deep down that one day life would bring that man back into his path, not for revenge, but for understanding. For now, though, he carried his mother's memory with him everywhere he went. Her voice echoed in his mind whenever he faced a challenge. Let your success be your revenge. And as he looked out over the city skyline one evening, the same skyline his mother had once gazed at with hope and sorrow, he whispered softly, "We made it, Mom." The lights of the city flickered like stars, as if she was answering him back. He didn't know it yet, but the day was coming when he would walk into a familiar office, the same one where his mother had once worked, where her story had begun and ended, and the man sitting behind the desk would have no idea that the past he tried to bury was about to walk right through his door. The sun had just begun to rise over the city, painting the skyline in gold and orange. The young man stood by his apartment window holding a cup of coffee in his hand. The view always reminded him of his mother. The same city that had broken her heart was now the one he was determined to conquer. It had been a few years since she passed away, but her presence never really left him. He could still hear her voice in his head whenever he doubted himself. "Keep going," she used to say. "You're meant for something bigger." He had built his own company from the ground up, a small real estate consulting firm that specialized in community development. He wanted to create projects that made a difference, not just tall glass towers for the rich. He believed in rebuilding neighborhoods, giving people a chance to live better lives. At first, no one took him seriously. He was young, ambitious, and came from nothing. But his ideas were smart and his work ethic was relentless. Soon his firm began to grow. What started as a one-man dream operating from a tiny rented office became a respected name in the industry. He didn't chase luxury or fame. He drove an old car, wore simple suits, and cared more about his work than appearances. What mattered most to him was the feeling he got when he saw families move into the homes his team built. He often thought Mom would be proud of this. One evening, as he was leaving the office, his phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. "Hello?" A deep voice came from the other end. "Good evening. My name is Daniel. I'm calling from Grant Development Group. We've been following your company's work for some time, and Mr. Grant would like to meet with you to discuss a possible partnership." He froze for a second. The name hit him like a cold wind. Grant Development Group, he knew that name. He had seen it on the letter his mother kept all those years ago, the letter that ended her career and changed her life forever. But his voice stayed calm. "I appreciate the offer," he said. "Send me the details and I'll take a look." After hanging up, he sat quietly for a while staring at his phone. He had built his whole life without needing to confront the man who had caused so much pain. Now fate was pulling their paths together. He didn't tell anyone about the call. That night, he sat at his desk, looking at his mother's picture. "You always said life has its own timing," he whispered. "Maybe this is it." The next week, the meeting was set. When the day arrived, he woke up early. He chose a simple navy blue suit, straightened his tie, and stood in front of the mirror. His reflection showed a confident man, calm and prepared. But beneath the surface, his heart was racing. The meeting was scheduled at the headquarters of Grant Development, a massive glass building that towered over the city, polished and intimidating. As he walked through the doors, he couldn't help but think about his mother walking into this same company decades ago. Filled with hope and ambition, the receptionist greeted him politely and led him to the top floor. The elevator ride felt endless. Each second echoed with memories he didn't want to remember. Finally, the doors opened. A large office stretched before him, decorated with expensive art and floor-to-ceiling windows. Behind a polished desk sat an older man with silver hair and a serious expression. William Grant. He looked up from his papers as the visitor entered. "Ah, you must be—" He paused, glancing at the name on his schedule. "Mr. Brooks," the young man extended his hand. "Yes, sir. Thank you for having me." William shook his hand firmly. "Please, have a seat." For a few moments they spoke about business, plans, projects, numbers. William complimented him on his company's achievements and innovative ideas. He seemed genuinely impressed. "You remind me of myself when I was younger," he said with a smile. The young man returned the smile politely, though inside the words stung. "If only you knew." As the meeting went on, William began to talk about a potential collaboration, something that could bring both their companies significant growth. But the young man's mind kept drifting back to his mother, to that old letter, and to the injustice she had endured. When the conversation slowed, he looked up and asked quietly, "Mr. Grant, can I ask you something personal?" William looked surprised but nodded. "Of course. Do you remember an employee named Angela Brooks?" The room went still. For a moment, William didn't move. His face changed slightly, just enough to show the shock beneath his calm exterior. "I haven't heard that name in a long time," he said carefully. "Yes, I remember her. Why do you ask?" The young man held his gaze. "She was my mother." The air in the room seemed to freeze. William's hand trembled slightly before he placed it on the desk to steady himself. "Your mother?" he repeated softly, as if saying the words would somehow make them make sense. "Yes," the young man said, his voice steady. "She worked for you more than 20 years ago. You fired her. She was pregnant with me at the time." William leaned back in his chair, his face pale. For a long time he said nothing. The weight of the past pressed heavily between them. Finally he whispered, "I see." The young man continued, his voice calm but firm. "I grew up watching my mother work herself to the bone. She raised me alone, never spoke badly about you and never asked for anything. But I always wondered who my father was. After she passed away, I found the letter you wrote, the one that ended her job." William looked down, unable to meet his eyes. "I made mistakes," he said quietly. "Many of them. I'm not here to shame you," the young man said. "I'm here because life brought me here, maybe for a reason." William swallowed hard. "Your mother? She was a good woman. I was a coward. I thought I was protecting myself, but I was only destroying someone who trusted me. I've regretted it ever since." There was silence again. The young man studied him carefully. The man before him wasn't the powerful figure from the stories his mother never told, but an old man burdened by choices he could never undo. "I didn't come here for an apology," he said. "I came here because my mother always believed that success should speak louder than bitterness. She wanted me to rise above the pain she carried." William finally looked up. His eyes were moist. "She must have been proud of you." "She was," the young man replied softly. "And I wanted you to know that she forgave you, even if you never asked her to." William closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. "I don't deserve that forgiveness." "Maybe not," the young man said, "but she gave it anyway. That's who she was." For a while, neither of them spoke. The sound of the city hummed faintly through the window. Then the young man stood up. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Grant. I'll think about the partnership offer." As he turned to leave, William called after him. "Wait," he stopped at the door. "Please," William said, his voice shaking. "Tell me about her. Tell me how she lived. I need to know." The young man hesitated, then turned back slowly. He told him about her strength, her laughter, the nights she stayed up studying, the sacrifices she made to build a life from nothing. He spoke of her kindness, her faith, and the pride she carried even when she had nothing else. William listened in silence, tears sliding down his face. When the young man finished, the room felt heavy with both sorrow and peace. She sounds like the best person I never deserved, William whispered. She was, came the quiet reply. The young man left the building without looking back. As the elevator doors closed, he took a deep breath. He felt lighter somehow, not because the pain was gone, but because he had faced it. Outside, the afternoon sun bathed the streets in gold. He walked slowly, letting the warmth touch his face. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel like he was running from the past. He had looked it in the eye and walked away with his head held high. Back in his office, he sat down and stared out the window. The city looked different now, less like a battlefield and more like a home. He thought of his mother again, imagining her sitting beside him, smiling. She'd say, "See? I told you the truth always finds its way," he murmured to himself with a small smile. Over the following weeks, he received several messages from William Grant, emails, phone calls, invitations to meet again. But he didn't respond right away. He needed time to think. One evening, after a long day at work, he received a letter in the mail. It was handwritten, with shaky but elegant penmanship. It began, "I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted to thank you for giving me a chance to face my past. I've built many things in my life, buildings, companies, wealth, but nothing I've ever made has been as strong as the woman I broke. I hope someday I can do something to honor her memory." The young man folded the letter and placed it next to his mother's photo. He didn't know if he would ever truly forgive William, but he knew that hate would only chain him to the past. So, he did what his mother would have wanted. He moved forward. He accepted the partnership, but on one condition: a portion of the profits would fund scholarships for single mothers who wanted to go back to school. When William heard this, he agreed immediately. It was the least he could do. In the months that followed, they worked together, not as father and son, but as two men rebuilding something broken. It wasn't easy. Some wounds never fully heal, but there was respect now and a quiet understanding. One evening, after finishing a meeting, William stood by the window of his office. The city lights shimmered below. He turned to the young man and said, "You've built something beautiful. Your mother would be proud." The young man smiled faintly. "That's all I ever wanted." As he left the office, William stayed behind, staring at the skyline. For the first time in years, he felt peace. Not because he had made things right, but because he had finally faced what he once ran from. And the young man, walking down the busy street, felt something shift inside him too. The story that began with pain had found its way to purpose. His mother's voice echoed softly in his heart. "Rise above it, my son." He looked up at the city lights, his heart full, and whispered, "We did it." The years that followed were different from anything he had known before. Life felt calmer, more balanced. The company he had built with his own hands was growing faster than ever, and for the first time, he had powerful partners backing his vision. His partnership with Grant Development had surprised many in the business world. Some saw it as a bold move, others called it risky, but for him it wasn't about business or profit. It was about turning something that once caused pain into something meaningful. The scholarship program they started together soon became well known. Dozens of women, many of them single mothers like his own, were able to go back to school, build careers, and change their lives. Every time he saw one of them smile during a graduation ceremony, he felt like his mother's spirit was watching and smiling too. William Grant had changed as well. The confident, untouchable businessman now seemed softer, quieter. He often stopped by the office just to talk, not about numbers or deals, but about life. Sometimes they'd sit by the window looking at the skyline, both lost in thought. "I've built a lot of things," William said one evening, his voice heavy with regret. "But I never built peace inside myself." "Until now, maybe." The younger man didn't respond right away. He just nodded. "Peace takes time," he said. "But it's worth the wait." William smiled faintly. "You sound like your mother." He looked down for a moment, feeling the familiar ache in his chest. She had a way of making hard things sound simple. They didn't talk much more after that, but the silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was peaceful. Months turned into years. The projects they worked on together began to change parts of the city that had long been forgotten. Old buildings were rebuilt, new parks opened, and people who once struggled to find homes now had a place to live. Every ribbon-cutting ceremony reminded the young man of where he came from. The small apartment, the quiet nights, his mother's tired smile. He carried her lessons with him in everything he did. When his employees faced challenges, he told them the same words his mother once told him. Don't let bitterness lead you. Work hard, rise higher. The success of their project soon attracted media attention. Reporters wanted interviews. They wanted to know the story behind this unlikely partnership, the once powerful tycoon and the young man who came from nothing. But both men avoided the spotlight. This story isn't about us, the young man would say. It's about the people we're helping. Still, one article eventually told the truth. It wasn't written by them, but by someone who had done their research. The headline read, "A Forgotten Story of Redemption in Chicago's Real Estate World." The article mentioned how years ago, a young woman named Angela Brooks had worked for William Grant and was fired unjustly. It explained, without going into details, how her son later built a business and unknowingly ended up working with the same man who had wronged her. When the article was published, it spread quickly. People were stunned by the story. Some called it poetic justice. Others said it was fate. But for the two men at the center of it, it wasn't about revenge or fate. It was about closure. William read the article alone in his office. His hands trembled as he held the paper. When he finished, he sat quietly for a long time. Then he picked up the phone and called the young man. "Did you see the article?" he asked softly. "Yes," came the calm reply. "I'm sorry," William said. "I never wanted your mother's name to be used like that." "It's okay," the young man said. "People were always going to find out someday. But if her story inspires someone, then maybe it's not such a bad thing." William exhaled deeply. "She deserved better," he said quietly. "She got the best she could," the young man replied. "She got a life full of love, even if it was hard." That night, William couldn't sleep. He thought about the woman he once knew, the mistakes he made, and the son she had raised without him. The next morning, he called his lawyer and made changes to his will. No one knew what he wrote, but he seemed lighter afterward, as if a burden had finally lifted. As the months passed, William's health began to decline. He was getting older, and the years of stress and regret had taken their toll. Still, he came to work as often as he could. Some days he'd sit quietly in the conference room, watching his young partner lead meetings, a proud smile hidden behind tired eyes. One afternoon, after a long meeting, he asked the young man to walk with him. They went outside, standing on the balcony overlooking the city. The air was cool, the streets below busy with life. "I don't think I have much time left," William said softly. "Don't say that," the young man replied. "I mean it," William said, "but I'm not afraid anymore. You gave me something I thought I'd lost a long time ago. Hope." The young man looked at him quietly. "I spent years building towers, but I never built anything that mattered." William continued, "You changed that. You made me see what real legacy means." For a moment, neither spoke. The city buzzed beneath them, unaware of the conversation happening above. "I didn't do it for you," the young man finally said. "I did it for her. But I'm glad it helped you too," William smiled. That's exactly what she would have said. A few weeks later, William didn't come to the office. The news came quietly. He had passed away in his sleep. There was no big announcement, no headlines. Just a simple notice in the paper. At his funeral, there weren't many people, just a handful of family members, some old friends, and the young man who stood quietly in the back, listening to the pastor's words. When it was over, he stayed behind for a while, standing by the grave. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just stood there, thinking about how life had come full circle. Later that week, he received a letter from William's attorney. It was short and handwritten, sealed in an envelope with his name on it. Inside, there was a note. It read, "If you're reading this, I'm gone. I know I can never change what I did, but I want to leave something behind that might bring a little good into the world. I've transferred part of my company shares into a foundation in your mother's name, the Angela Brooks Foundation. It will continue the scholarship program and expand housing projects for single mothers. It's the least I can do to honor her and you." At the bottom, there was a final line. "I hope, wherever she is, she knows I never forgot her." The young man folded the letter carefully, feeling tears rise in his eyes. It wasn't forgiveness he felt, it was something gentler, something like peace. He decided to keep the foundation running. The Angela Brooks Foundation grew into one of the most respected charitable organizations in the city. Every year he attended its events not for recognition, but to meet the people it helped. He saw mothers smiling as their children played, women earning degrees, families moving into safe homes. Each time he thought of his own mother and whispered, "We did it." Years went by. His company continued to thrive, but he never lost sight of what mattered most. He lived simply, surrounded by good people who believed in his vision. Sometimes he'd visit the old neighborhood where he grew up, walking past the small apartment where everything began. The walls were older now, the streets quieter, but he could still feel her there somehow, her laughter, her strength, her love. One evening, as he stood outside the building, a little boy ran past him chasing a red ball. The boy stopped and smiled up at him. "Hi," the boy said. "Hey there," he replied with a smile. "You live here?" The boy nodded. "Yeah, my mom says we're lucky to have this place. She got help from something called the Brooks Foundation." He froze for a second, then smiled warmly. "That's wonderful," he said softly. "Always remember to thank your mom. She's the real reason you're lucky." The boy nodded and ran off again. The man stood there for a while, looking at the building as the evening sun faded into night. A gentle breeze passed through, carrying the faint scent of spring. He closed his eyes and whispered, "You're still here, aren't you, Mom?" It felt like she was. In the quiet that followed, memories of her voice filled his mind, not in sadness, but in comfort. He could almost hear her saying, "You kept your promise. You didn't let bitterness lead you." He smiled to himself. In that moment, he understood that life had a strange way of healing what once seemed impossible to mend. It didn't happen through anger or revenge. It happened through forgiveness, through building something that mattered, through carrying the lessons of love even when life wasn't fair. The city lights began to flicker on one by one, glowing against the darkening sky. He stood there, hands in his pockets, watching as the world moved forward, just as his mother had always wanted him to do. Sometimes people say that time heals all wounds. But he knew better. Time doesn't heal. People do, through kindness, through courage, through the choice to rise above what tried to break them. As he walked away from the old building that night, he felt lighter. The story that began in pain had found its way to peace. The boy who grew up without a father had become the man his mother always believed he would be. And though she was gone, her presence lived on, in every life touched by the foundation, in every mother who dared to start over, and in every building that rose not just from concrete and steel, but from hope. He smiled up at the sky one last time. "You were right, Mom," he whispered. "The truth always finds its way." Then he walked toward the lights of the city, ready for whatever came next. Years passed, and life seemed to move at a gentle pace. The young man, now older and wiser, found peace in his work and in the lives touched by the foundation. The city that once felt cold and unforgiving now carried traces of warmth wherever he looked. He often visited the community centers built under his mother's name. Children laughed in the playgrounds, mothers chatted while watching them, and the air always carried the sound of new beginnings. Every time he saw those moments, he felt her presence again, soft, unseen, but deeply felt. The foundation had grown beyond anything he had imagined. It wasn't just about education or housing anymore. It was about rebuilding dignity. Women who once struggled now ran their own businesses. Some became mentors for others starting out. The cycle of strength continued, just as his mother had dreamed without ever seeing it happen. He didn't take credit for it. He never stood on stage or sought applause. When people thanked him, he'd simply say, "This isn't about me. It's about what love can build even when life tries to break it." Still, there were days when he missed her so deeply that words couldn't describe it. There were quiet mornings when he'd wake up before sunrise and talk to her as if she were still there. He'd sit by the window, a cup of coffee in hand, and whisper, "I hope I'm still making you proud." And somehow, in those still moments, he always felt an answer, not in words, but in peace. One day, he received an invitation to speak at a university graduation ceremony. It was the same school he had once dreamed of attending when he was a boy, but couldn't afford at the time. Now, years later, that same university had built a new learning center funded by the foundation. They wanted him to give a speech to the graduating class. He hesitated at first. He wasn't a man of fancy speeches or long talks, but something inside him told him this was important, so he agreed. When the day arrived, he stood backstage holding his notes. The large auditorium was filled with students, parents, and teachers. The sound of applause echoed as the dean introduced him. He walked onto the stage slowly, adjusting the microphone. For a moment, he just looked at the crowd. Rows of young faces stared back at him, faces full of hope, excitement, and nerves, just like he once had. He smiled. "Good evening, everyone," he began. "I don't usually give speeches, so forgive me if I sound a little nervous." The audience chuckled softly. He continued. "I grew up not far from here. My mother raised me alone. She didn't have much, but she had dreams. Dreams bigger than our small apartment could hold. She used to tell me that the world doesn't owe you anything, but you owe yourself the chance to rise." He paused, his voice soft but steady. "She worked hard, even when life was unfair. She taught me that forgiveness isn't weakness and success means nothing if you don't lift others along the way." He looked down at his notes, then folded them and put them away. "I had planned to read a speech," he said with a faint smile, "but I think it's better if I just speak from my heart." The hall was silent, everyone listening. "My mother never got to see the life I built, but everything I do is because of her. There was a time when I carried anger, when I wanted to prove everyone wrong. But I learned something. Anger might push you forward, but love keeps you going." He took a breath. "So to those of you starting your journeys, remember this. Life isn't about how high you climb, but how many you help climb with you. Because someday the people you help will become the reason others keep going. That's how you make a real difference." When he finished, the audience stood and clapped for a long time. Some people wiped away tears. He felt his own eyes grow wet, but he didn't hide it. It wasn't sadness, it was gratitude. After the ceremony, a young woman approached him with her little boy. She smiled shyly. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said. "I was one of the first scholarship recipients from your foundation. I graduated last year and now I work here at the university." He smiled warmly. "That's wonderful," he said. "You should be proud." "I am," she said, holding her son's hand. "But I'm even prouder to show him that no matter where you start, you can still build something beautiful." He bent down and smiled at the boy. "Your mom is a superhero," he said gently. The boy grinned and the woman laughed softly. "That's what he tells me every day," she said. As they walked away, he stood there for a moment, letting the moment sink in. He realized then that these small, quiet moments were what true success looked like. Not awards, not money, but lives changed because someone cared. Later that evening, as he sat in his office looking out over the city, he thought about everything that had happened over the years. The mistakes, the pain, the forgiveness, and the healing, it all led to this. He thought about William too. The older man had made terrible choices, but in the end he tried to make them right. Life didn't always give second chances, but sometimes when people truly sought redemption, grace found a way to meet them halfway. He had learned that holding on to anger only built more pain. Letting go didn't mean forgetting, it meant freeing yourself from what could no longer be changed. He leaned back in his chair and whispered, "You were right, Mom. Forgiveness doesn't make you weak. It makes you free." The city lights shimmered in the distance, and he felt a quiet peace settle inside him. Over the next few years, he continued to grow the foundation. He opened new centers in other cities, helping families who had faced hardships like his mother once did. Each new building carried her name proudly on the front wall. The Angela Brooks Foundation. He didn't care about fame or recognition. What mattered to him was that her story kept inspiring others. He knew that even though she wasn't there to see it, her strength lived on through every person who found hope because of her name. One summer evening, as he walked through one of the new community centers, he noticed a mural on the wall. It was a painting of a woman holding a child, her face strong and kind. Underneath it were the words, "Love is the foundation that never breaks." He stopped and stared at it for a long time. It was as if someone had painted his mother without ever meeting her. A little girl nearby tugged at his sleeve. "Do you like the painting?" she asked. He smiled down at her. "Yes," he said softly. "It reminds me of someone special. She looks like my mom," the girl said proudly. "She says this place changed our lives." He nodded, his heart full. "It changed mine too," he said. When he left that day, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. He stood outside for a while, watching the light fade. The wind was warm, carrying with it the sounds of laughter from inside the building. It was then that he realized something profound. His life had come full circle. How the pain that once defined his story had turned into purpose. The woman who was once wronged had become a symbol of hope. The man who abandoned her had found redemption before his death, and the boy she raised had fulfilled her dream, to build something that lasted longer than either of them. He didn't see his journey as perfect. It wasn't. It was filled with loss, mistakes, and hard choices, but that was what made it real. That was what made it human. Years later, when he grew older and began to slow down, he often visited his mother's grave. The headstone was simple, just like she was. It read, Angela Brooks, "A mother's love builds worlds unseen." He would bring flowers, sit beside the stone, and talk to her about everything happening. He told her about the people the foundation helped, about the children who smiled because of her story, and about how her name had become a symbol of strength. Sometimes, when the wind blew gently, he could almost hear her voice. Soft, calm, and loving. "You did well, my boy," it seemed to say. And every time he would smile and whisper back, "I learned from the best." One spring morning, after many years of peace and hard work, he closed his office for the last time. He had decided to retire and hand the foundation over to a new generation. Young leaders, many of them once helped by the foundation, were ready to continue the mission. He left the building quietly with no fanfare or speeches. He took one last look at the sign on the wall, his mother's name shining proudly in the sunlight, and felt tears rise in his eyes. He whispered, "We made it, Mom." Then he walked away with a calm heart. That night, as he sat on his porch watching the stars, he thought about everything, the past, the pain, the healing, and the love that had carried him through. He smiled, feeling the gentle peace of knowing he had lived the life she wanted for him. He had turned heartbreak into hope, and in doing so he had built something far greater than success. He had built legacy. The stars shimmered above him, and somewhere in that quiet night, he could almost hear her laughter again, the same soft laugh that had once filled a tiny apartment many years ago. He closed his eyes, feeling her presence all around him, and whispered one last time, "Thank you, Mom." And in that stillness it felt like the whole world answered back, reminding him that love once given never truly leaves. It only grows. Years went by quietly after he retired. The world outside moved faster, but his days became slower, softer. The noise of meetings and phone calls was replaced by the gentle rhythm of life. The sound of birds in the morning, the hum of the city in the distance, and the laughter of neighbors' children playing outside. He had moved to a smaller house on the edge of the city, surrounded by trees and light. It wasn't fancy, but it felt like peace. For the first time in his life, he didn't wake up thinking about deadlines or deals. He simply woke up grateful to still be here. He spent most mornings sitting on his porch drinking coffee and watching the sunrise. He liked to think that somewhere in those golden rays his mother was smiling down on him. Every morning felt like a small hello from her, quiet, comforting, familiar. Sometimes he received letters from people connected to the foundation. Former students, single mothers, young business owners, all writing to say thank you. Some sent pictures of their families. Some wrote long stories about how the foundation helped them start new lives. He read every letter carefully. He kept them all in a wooden box near his desk. It wasn't just paper to him. It was proof that his mother's love had reached places she never dreamed of. One afternoon, as he sat reading on the porch, a car stopped in front of his house. A young man stepped out holding a folder. He looked nervous, adjusting his tie as he approached. "Excuse me, sir," the young man said politely. "Are you the founder of the Brooks Foundation?" He smiled and nodded. "I was, yes. These days I just watch from the sidelines." The young man grinned. "I work there now. I joined a few months ago. I wanted to meet you in person. My mom received a scholarship years ago. Because of that, she was able to become a nurse. She used to tell me that the foundation saved her life." He listened quietly, touched by the words. "Your mom sounds like a strong woman," he said. "She is," the young man said proudly. "And she told me to tell you thank you. She said people like you remind her that there's still good in the world." He chuckled softly. "I'm not sure I deserve that much credit, but tell her thank you too." Tell her she's the reason we keep doing what we do. The young man nodded, then hesitated before asking, "Can I take a photo with you?" "My mom would love it." "Of course," he said with a gentle smile. They stood by the porch, the young man snapping a quick picture. Afterward, he thanked him again and left. As the car drove away, he sat back down, thinking about how life had changed. The foundation he started to honor his mother had become something far greater than he imagined. It had turned into a living memory, one that connected strangers through kindness. That night he couldn't sleep. He lay in bed thinking about the journey that had brought him here. The memories came softly. His mother's laughter, her long hours at work, her comforting words on nights when things seemed impossible. He thought about the man who had caused them pain, the one who had fired her and walked away. William Grant. Even after all these years, he sometimes wondered what drove that man's choices. He had forgiven him long ago, but part of him still reflected on how life had forced them both to change. William had found redemption before his death. That mattered. It reminded him that even the worst mistakes didn't have to define a person forever. What mattered was what they did afterward, how they chose to make things right. The next morning, he found himself writing. Not a speech, not a business plan, but something personal. A letter. He wrote, "If anyone ever reads this, I want them to know that forgiveness isn't about forgetting the pain someone caused. It's about freeing yourself from it. My mother was hurt deeply, but she never taught me to hate. She taught me to grow, to build, and to believe in goodness even when life was unfair. Everything I've done since is because of that lesson. If my story helps even one person let go of anger and choose peace instead, then it's worth sharing." When he finished, he placed the letter in an envelope and tucked it inside the box with all the others. Days turned into months. The seasons changed, and so did he. His hair turned completely gray, his steps grew slower, but his spirit stayed bright. Every time he visited the city, he was amazed at how much it had transformed. New buildings, new faces, new energy. One afternoon, the current director of the foundation invited him to a special event, the 25th anniversary of its creation. They were unveiling a new headquarters building in downtown Chicago. He agreed to go, feeling both nervous and proud. When he arrived, the building took his breath away. Tall, elegant, and full of light, it stood as a symbol of hope. Above the entrance were large letters carved into stone. The Angela Brooks Foundation, built on love and second chances. He stood there for a long time, reading those words over and over again. It felt like his mother was standing beside him, smiling. Inside, people greeted him warmly. Many knew his story, how everything had started from one woman's strength and a son's determination. But no one treated him like a celebrity. They treated him like family. During the ceremony, the director took the stage and spoke about the foundation's history. "This all began," she said, "with one woman who refused to give up and a son who turned her pain into purpose. Their story reminds us that compassion can change generations." When the applause began, the director turned to him and said, "We wouldn't be here without you. Would you like to say a few words?" He stood slowly, smiling humbly. "I'm not good with speeches anymore," he said softly. "But I'll just say this, I didn't build this alone. My mother did. Every person this foundation helps, every dream it makes possible, belongs to her spirit. I just carried her torch." The room fell silent, filled with quiet emotion. Then the applause came again, long, heartfelt, genuine. After the event, as he walked outside, a small crowd of students came up to him. One of them asked, "Sir, how did you keep going when life was so hard?" He thought for a moment before answering. "I didn't always feel strong," he said. "There were times I wanted to give up. But every time I looked at my mother, I remembered that love is stronger than pain. If you hold on to that, you'll always find your way." The student smiled. "Thank you, sir," she said. He nodded, touched her shoulder gently, and replied, "Don't thank me. Thank the people who believe in you. That's where strength begins." That night, as he walked through the city streets, he saw lights from the new foundation building glowing against the dark sky. It reminded him of the nights he and his mother used to walk home after her long shifts, tired but together. He could almost hear her humming softly beside him. Life, he thought, really did come full circle. He sat on a bench nearby and looked up at the stars. They seemed brighter that night, maybe because, for the first time, he truly felt at peace with everything. He thought about legacy, not the kind written in history books or measured by wealth, but the kind that lived quietly in the hearts of others, the kind his mother had left behind, the kind he would leave too. As the night grew colder, he zipped his coat and smiled. "We did it, Mom," he whispered. "You and me. We turned pain into something beautiful." Years later, when he was gone, people continued to tell his story. Not because he was rich or famous, but because he was real, because he showed that love and forgiveness could rebuild even the most broken beginnings. The foundation continued to grow, helping thousands of families. Every year on Mother's Day, they held a special ceremony in honor of Angela Brooks, the woman whose strength started it all. Her story became a reminder that one act of courage, one act of kindness could change countless lives, and so her legacy and her sons lived on, not in stone or buildings alone, but in hearts. Somewhere, in a small neighborhood not far from where it all began, a little boy would tell his mother, "One day, I want to build something like the Brooks Foundation," and his mother would smile and say, "You can, sweetheart," because people like them showed us what's possible. The story never really ended. It just kept moving forward, passed down from one generation to the next, whispered in classrooms, retold in homes, and remembered in quiet prayers. It wasn't just a story about pain or loss. It was a story about strength, faith, and the power of love to outlast even the darkest times. And somewhere beyond the noise of the world, in the quiet places where love lives forever, a mother's voice still whispered to her son, "Proud and gentle as ever, you did well."